What if the most terrifying naval blockade in history was dismantled by a weapon that costs less than a single gallon of gasoline? Welcome to Navy, where we peel back the curtain on the geopolitical maneuvers that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. Before we dive into the classified shift in the Persian Gulf, make sure to subscribe and share this with someone who needs a reality check on global power. For the last 30 years, the Strait of Hormuz has served as a loaded gun held to the head of the global economy, controlled by the IRGCN. Tehran's naval strategy was never about matching the United States hull for hull. It was a masterpiece of mathematical cruelty designed to exploit a fundamental American weakness. This is the story of the swarm doctrine, a tactic that transformed the most powerful navy in history into a giant force to swat at thousands of flies. At the heart of this doctrine was the Shahed 136, a low-cost delta-wing suicide drone that is essentially a flying lawnmower engine packed with high explosives. These drones cost about $20,000 to manufacture, which is less than the price of a base model sedan, and they are designed for massive, uncoordinated waves. When 60 of these drones crest the horizon at once, a U.S. destroyer commander faces an impossible choice that keeps the Pentagon awake at night. To protect the ship and its crew of 300 sailors, the commander must authorize the launch of the RIM-66 Standard Missile 2, or SM-2. Each SM-2 interceptor is a miracle of engineering, but it comes with a price tag of roughly $2.1 million per unit. Do the math. To take down a wave of drones worth $1.2 million, the U.S. Navy is forced to burn $126 million in sophisticated munitions. This is not just a military engagement. It is a deliberate economic crime committed against the United States defense budget by a regional power. But the financial cost is only half of the nightmare. The real existential threat is a concept known to naval planners as magazine depth. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the workhorse of the American fleet, carries exactly 96 vertical launch system, or VLS, cells. These cells are the ship's only storage for missiles. Once they are fired, they cannot be reloaded at sea in high-threat environments. Iran's IRGCN calculated that if they could force a destroyer to exhaust its VLS magazine in a few hours, the ship becomes defenseless. A billion-dollar destroyer with empty tubes is nothing more than a high-tech coffin, forced to retreat to a friendly port for a reload. By removing even 2 destroyers through magazine exhaustion, Iran could effectively close the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial traffic and global oil. This 21-mile stretch of water is the jugular of the global energy market, carrying millions of barrels of crude oil every hour. In 2024 and 2025, the threat reached a breaking point as Iranian-backed proxies refined their swarm tactics, proving the math worked in their favor. Global shipping companies began to realize that the U.S. Navy's shield was formidable, but it was also finite and dangerously expensive to maintain. The IRGC felt emboldened, publicly dismissing Western naval power as a paper tiger that would eventually crumble under its own operational costs. They believed they had found the permanent counter to the American aircraft carrier, a way to win by simply outlasting the Pentagon's supply chain. But while Tehran celebrated their perceived advantage, the U.S. Navy was preparing a silent response that would turn the tide on June 2, 2026. The old rules of naval warfare were about to be shredded by a technology that doesn't rely on missiles, gunpowder, or physical projectiles. Deep in the R&D labs of Lockheed Martin, a system was being perfected that would make the $2 million interceptor look like an ancient relic. The world was looking for a new missile, but the Pentagon was looking for something that moved at the speed of light. This shift wasn't just about a new weapon. It was about the total inversion of the economic battlefield that had favored Iran for 30 years. Everything was ready. The USS Preble was moving into position, and the IRGCN was about to sail directly into a technological buzzsaw. On June 2, 2026, the heat haze over the Strait of Hormuz wasn't just weather. It was the shimmering distortion of a new era in naval combat. The USS Preble sat silently in the channel, its Aegis combat system tracking dozens of incoming signatures across the horizon. Iran's Revolutionary Guard expected a victory of attrition, sending waves of suicide drones to drain the American ship's finite magazine. They didn't know the Preble wasn't carrying a traditional payload for this fight. It was carrying the power of the sun. The high-energy laser, with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance, or Helios, was now live and fully operational. This 60-kilowatt Lockheed Martin masterpiece was no longer a prototype being tested in a controlled lab environment. It was fully integrated into the ship's nervous system, ready to strike targets at 186,000 miles per second. To keep the beam focused through the thick salt spray of the Gulf, the system utilized advanced adaptive optics. But the real muscle was hidden deep below the deck, where the ship's Rolls-Royce AG9 140 generators were screaming. These turbines pumped raw electrical power directly into the laser's capacitors, ensuring the weapon never ran dry. As long as those generators were spinning, the Preble possessed what planners call an infinite magazine. The shift created the economic inversion, a total collapse of the mathematical advantage Iran had held for decades. Previously, the U.S. spent $2 million on an SM-2 interceptor to kill a $20,000 Shahed drone. That 100-to-1 ratio was a strategy of financial exhaustion designed to force a retreat from the region. Helios flipped that script entirely. A single shot from this laser cost roughly $1 in fuel and electricity. We are looking at a 1 to 20,000 exchange ratio in favor of the United States. Iran lost assets to a weapon that cost less than a cup of coffee per shot. The swarm doctrine, the very foundation of Iranian naval power, was being vaporized for literal pennies. Before we dive into the secret undersea layer of this defense, I need to know you're following this logic. Drop a comment with the word light right now to help the algorithm share this breakdown with more people. Subscribing to Navy ensures you're part of the select group that understands how modern warfare actually works. But the surface wasn't the only place where the status quo was being dismantled on that June morning. Beneath the waves, Iran's Ghadir-class midget submarines were waiting to strike from the thermal shadows. These small, quiet subs are notoriously difficult to track in the shallow, noisy waters of the Persian Gulf. They were meant to be the ultimate backstab, a torpedo ambush while the destroyers were distracted by the drones. That's where Project Lamprey comes in. Lamprey is an extra-large unmanned undersea vehicle designed for persistent, autonomous hunting. These robotic predators loiter in the shipping lanes for weeks, acting as a total domain shield for the fleet. They use advanced sonar arrays to pick up the faint hum of a Ghadir sub long before it reaches firing range. By neutralizing the undersea threat without risking a manned crew, the U.S. effectively blinded the IRGCN's subsurface fleet. The Preble was no longer just a ship. It was a multi-layered, automated slaughterhouse. Every drone that fell and every sub that was forced to retreat signaled the end of the attrition era. The math war was over, and the Iranians realized they had brought a knife to a laser fight. But the ripples of this engagement weren't staying in the Middle East. Thousands of miles away, in the South China Sea, the Chinese PLA was watching these events with growing horror. The Pentagon was warning every adversary on the planet. If a single destroyer could neutralize a 100-boat swarm for the price of a tank of gas, everything changed. The technical data from the Preble was being analyzed in real time by analysts at the Pentagon in Pearl Harbor. They were seeing the end of the anti-access strategy that China had spent trillions to perfect. The era of the carrier killer was now facing its first true existential crisis. The data streaming from the USS Preble didn't just stay in the Persian Gulf. It flashed directly to the simulation rooms at the Pentagon, where the high-tech carrier killer math was being rewritten. For decades, China's PLA has operated on a single, terrifying assumption. They believed they could overwhelm any U.S. strike group by sheer volume, saturating defenses until the interceptors ran dry. This is the core of their anti-axis area denial strategy. It is a mathematical trap designed to make the cost of intervention higher than the reward. But on June 2nd, 2026, that trap snapped shut on the hunter instead of the prey. The 60-kilowatt Helios beam proved that the economic advantage of the swarm had been deleted. Think about the implications in the South China Sea. If a single destroyer can neutralize 100 drones for the price of a tank of gas, the saturation doctrine is dead. The Chinese Dongfeng missiles and Shahed-style swarms rely on depleting the U.S. Navy's cells, forcing a retreat by making us run out of $2 million missiles. Helios changes the math by a factor of 20,000 to 1. It is no longer a war of attrition. It is now a war of electrical generation. As long as those Rolls-Royce AG 9140 generators are spinning, the magazine is infinite. There is no reload time, no crane required, and no retreat for supplies. However, we have to look at the hard physics. This technology isn't invincible, and the Pentagon knows it very well. The biggest enemy of the laser isn't the IRGC or the PLA. It is a dangerous phenomenon called atmospheric blooming. In the heavy humidity and salt spray of the Persian Gulf, the laser beam can lose focus. The air acts as a lens, scattering energy before impact. To fight this, the Preble uses adaptive optics. These systems adjust the beam thousands of times per second to compensate for thermal distortion. There is also the issue of thermal management. Firing a high-energy weapon generates a massive amount of internal heat that must be bled off. If the ship is targeted by a continuous, non-stop wave of targets, the Helios could hit its duty cycle limit. It would need to cool down. This is where Project Lamprey comes in. While Helios handles the sky, these extra-large unmanned undersea vehicles hunt the Ghadir-class midget submarines in the shallows. By automating the defense of the lower domain, the Navy frees up its manned crews to focus entirely on the high-tier threats. I need to pause here because this shift is massive. Drop a comment with the word photon if you think the age of traditional missiles is ending. The success of this system creates a new reality for global oil markets. Iran's primary lever, the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, has been removed. Without the threat of a successful blockade, The diplomatic power shifts. The US can now negotiate from a position of technical dominance. Beijing is watching this closely. Their entire strategy is built on the same missile saturation logic that just failed in the Middle East. If Helios can scale to 150 kilowatts or 300 kilowatts, even supersonic cruise missiles become easy targets. The carrier killer becomes a museum piece. We are witnessing the end of asymmetric warfare as we know it. The cost of attacking has finally become higher than the cost of defending. The US Navy didn't just win a skirmish in the Strait of Hormuz, they reclaimed the speed of light as a tactical advantage. This is the hidden truth of the 2026 crisis. It wasn't about oil, it was about proving that the era of the swarm is over. The rules of engagement have been rewritten in a flash of invisible energy. The world of 2027 will look very different due to the Preble. If you want to stay ahead of the next geopolitical shift, stay here. Hit the like button and subscribe to Who's Navy. Ignore the evening news and share this video with someone who needs to understand the brand new world order.